You've seen it, right? Once a year, people are walking around with this dark smudge on their foreheads. It's a really public, really striking thing. But what's it all about? What does it actually mean? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this ancient tradition and really demystify Ash Wednesday.
Okay, first things first, let's put this on the calendar. The next Ash Wednesday is going to be on February 18th, 2026. And that's not just some random date picked out of a hat. The way it's calculated is actually the first big clue to what this is all about.
So that brings us to the big question. Why the ashes? What's the story here? I mean, this is a really ancient, really public ritual, and it turns out it weaves together some incredible history, some super deep symbolism, and for a lot of people, a really profound personal journey.
All right, so let's get into it. To really get what the ashes are about, you have to understand that Ash Wednesday, it's not a one-off thing. It's actually the starting line. Think of it like the beginning of a 40-day spiritual marathon, one that leads right up to one of the biggest holidays in Christianity.
So here's the big picture, right? Ash Wednesday isn't just a day. It's the official kickoff for a whole season called Lent. And this 40-day period, it's all about just hitting pause, you know? It's a time for repentance, for reflection, all to get ready for Easter. You could almost call it the spiritual deep breath before the big celebration.
Okay, now let's zoom right in on the symbol itself. Those ashes, they are so much more than just dust. They carry this really profound meaning, a weight that goes back literally thousands of years. And this quote, this is one of the key things a priest or a minister might say as they apply the ashes. It's pulled straight from the book of Genesis. And wow, it's this incredibly powerful, super humbling reminder that, well, life is finite. It's a moment that's designed to just make you stop and really think about where you came from and where you're ultimately going. So when you break it down, these ashes are packed with basically 3 layers of meaning. First, you've got mortality, that stark reminder we just talked about. Second, there's repentance, which is about acknowledging, when you've done wrong and making a commitment to change. And third, just by wearing them out in public, they become this really visible symbol of humility.
But wait, where do they even get the ashes? This is actually really cool. They're made by burning the dried up palm branches from the previous year's Palm Sunday. The day that celebrates Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. It creates this beautiful, symbolic cycle, right? It connects the joy of one year directly to the repentance of the next.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the day itself. Let's zoom back out for a second and look at the whole season it kicks off, the 40 days of Lent. And I'll tell you what, that number, 40, is definitely not an accident. Yeah, the 40 days of Lent are specifically meant to mirror the 40 days that Jesus spent out in the wilderness, fasting and praying, before he started his public ministry. So it's this period that's set aside for discipline, for focus, for some serious spiritual preparation. All right, now this is where the calendar math can get a little tricky and a lot of people get tripped up. If you actually count the days from Ash Wednesday all the way to Easter, you get 46 days, not 40. So what gives? Well, here's the key. The Sundays don't count. In this tradition, every Sunday is treated like a little Easter, a sort of mini feast day to celebrate the resurrection. So you take out those 6 Sundays and boom, you land exactly on 40 days. And this kind of shows you the dual nature of the whole season. The word Lent itself, it actually comes from an Old English word, Lenten, which means spring or the lengthening of days. So even in a time that's focused on repentance, you've got this built-in promise of hope and renewal, just like spring itself. So, where did all this come from? How did it even start? Well, this tradition definitely wasn't created overnight. No way. It evolved over hundreds of years from a really specific practice in the early church into the global thing we see today. Way back in the early church, the whole ashes thing was originally for a very specific group of people. We're talking about individuals who had committed really serious sins and or publicly trying to rejoin the community. They would literally wear rough clothing, like sackcloth, and cover themselves in ashes as this very public, very outward sign that they were repentant. So you can really see how it evolved. What started with this small group of public penitents, it gradually grew. By about the 7th century, it wasn't just for a select few anymore. The entire church community started to get on board. And then finally, in the year 1091, Pope Urban II made it an official practice for the entire Western Church. And today, this tradition is seen across a ton of major Christian denominations. You'll find it in the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Communion, Lutheran churches, Methodist churches, pretty widespread. But it's worth noting that the Eastern Orthodox churches do things a bit differently. They have their own tradition. Their Lent starts on what's called Clean Monday, and they don't actually use the ashes ritual.
Okay, so we've covered the what, the how, and the when. Let's bring it all home and talk about the big one, the why. What is the whole point of this ritual in our modern world? At its core, Ash Wednesday is basically an invitation. It's an invitation to do a spiritual reset. It's a day to just stop, look inward, and kind of reorient your life. It marks the start of this very intentional journey away from old habits and toward renewal, with everything building up to that big celebration of new life at Easter.
And in the end, the whole tradition really just invites believers to ask themselves a really fundamental question. What am I really living for? And what needs to change to get my life in line with that purpose? And that's a question that goes way beyond any single faith, right? It's an invitation for a moment of pretty profound personal reflection, really for anyone,